Canada picks a new head to lead the public inquiry into foreign interference. This is the Great White North Report.
I'm in love with the system, never going home. I'm in love.
Justice Marie-Josée Hogue is honored to lead the foreign interference inquiry, and that hearing is soon. The start of the hearing is soon to be determined. The inquiry will look at claims that China, Russia, and other states meddled in Canadian elections. There's actually a lot of meddling going on in Canada, and it takes different forms. But let's go in this article. So the federal government has chosen Justice Hogue to lead a highly anticipated public inquiry. This is something that should have happened 10 months ago and would have saved us a lot of time and money, but the Liberals squandered it. They chose a high-profile candidate, David Johnston, who has all the credentials, and it's probably sincere as hell, but he's too closely linked to the Trudeau family, which might give him a little bit of a bias, and it undermined his credibility. I have nothing personally against Mr. Johnson himself. I think he served his country well, but he was not in touch. He's too old, and he's out of touch. He thought that there shouldn't be a public inquiry, that Canadians cannot be trusted to make informed decisions, and that it should be kept under Parliament, which meant it should be behind closed doors. So Public Safety Minister LeBlanc formally announced Thursday morning that the Quebec Court of Appeal judge will preside over an independent inquiry investigating interference by China, Russia, and other states and non-state actors in 2019-2021. Now, it must be noted that the United States does also meddle in our election process somewhat, in our democratic institutions, but when again, Canadians do the same thing in the United States. Canadian businesses and politicians lobby U.S. politicians for the same thing. U.S. businesses do the same in Canada. It's a tit for tat, but it doesn't change a lot of things. China uses its own citizens, uses people that just recently arrived in Canada from mainland China by threatening to cut off their own families back in China if they don't agree. It's quite simple. The CCP also takes out ads in newspapers, throws financial support against candidates it likes, and a bunch of other fun stuff. I imagine Russia would do the same thing, but I think Russian interference is a lot less successful than the Chinese one. So she's also tasked with looking at how intelligence flowed to decision makers in the context of the past two elections. There was a whole bunch of intelligence leaks last March, which prompted Trudeau to assign a special rapporteur, even though this story has been around for a couple of years. And China is not the only country that seeks to interfere in an appropriate way. And Justice Hogue will have the ability to follow up the evidence that she brought up to date by our intelligence agencies, LeBlanc told reporters. So all four major parties, the Liberals, the Conservatives, the Bloc, and the NDP, all agreed on this, and to have a public inquiry, which should have been called back in March. So we're not sure when it's going to begin, because Hogue officially becomes commissioner on September 18th, and she's honored to be at the helm of the inquiry. Probably a political decision that we pick someone from Quebec and then it's a woman. So according to the terms of reference, she has to deliver an interim report by the end of February, and a final report is due by the end of 2024, just in time for the next election. Her appointment comes after months of consultations between the government and opposition parties. Back when David Johnston released his report, the NDP and the Green Party were the only two that jumped at the chance to see what was in it, and Elizabeth May, head of the Green Party, was frustrated by the lack of detail in top-secret documents on foreign interference. Some of the opposition calls for a Foreign Agent Registry Act. That's what the Conservatives and the NDP have been calling for that. I call for that myself. And the parties all agreed that the inquiry should start in the open, so that Canadians will understand why certain highly classified intelligence information has been treated by law in a confidential matter, because people can also get harassed and die, and you could lose your job. So Hogue will have more power this time in what can be released, because intelligence in Canada is protected by national security laws, but there are times where it should be made public, and Hogue will have access to cabinet confidences. I know Trudeau has publicly stated he will gladly testify in front of it, but again, this is something that could have been done months ago and saved us a lot of time and effort. Now, Poilievre has been calling for a public inquiry since everything started. The NDP are trying to tweet that they secured an inquiry through sustained pressure and leadership. Considering that they jumped at the chance that David Johnston offered to view all the documents and not make it public, that they're just jumping on the bandwagon. Now, confidence in electoral system damage? Not really. I think Chinese interference mainly targeted certain urban areas, might have changed a couple of seats. Now, Hogue's background in commercial and civil litigation, so she's not exactly experienced in national security matters, but that'll give her fresh eyes and a fresh perspective, I think. So hopefully everything goes well with this. Do I believe that China meddled in our elections? Oh yeah, they've been doing it for years. They use soft power and hard power. Well, like I said, China's not the only country that does it. The United States does it. Russia does it. Also, Saudi Arabia does it. Simply through international students. The idea with us bringing international students to Canada is a form of soft power. We bring them to Canada, show them how great the country is. Some of them might stay, some will go home and at least bring something Canadian back with them. Fresh perspective. That's the general idea, but universities love money too. And when we had our falling out with Saudi Arabia, it cost the universities $140 million in revenues. But it goes even deeper than that. When Saudi Arabia sends their students over, they're also influencing. Most of these students are going to things like Muslim studies, Islamic studies, and Middle East history and language, which means Saudi Arabia controls it. And any criticism of Islam is not allowed in universities because of this. You're considered an Islamophobe. A case in point is last year, a U.S. university professor of art history had a series of lectures on Islamic art in the 14th century, and he was going to show Islamic art that portrayed Muhammad in paintings that were done in the 14th century, which was perfectly normal back then. In today's Islamic society, any pictures and portraits of Muhammad are strictly forbidden. Any kind of art that has Muhammad in it is strictly forbidden. But back in the 14th century, it's perfectly acceptable. So this art professor in the United States warned his students before they attended, if you're not comfortable, don't show up. What happened? One Muslim student showed up, and then as soon as she saw the picture, she went and complained to the head of the university. She went right to the head of the university and got this professor fired. In Germany, Professor Lühling wrote a highly regarded thesis on Islam and how it started. He won the most prestigious prize in that field for his thesis, and he should have been able to get a chair at any university. But what happened? Even though he won this award, he got fired from his own university and hasn't been able to find a job since. And we're going back to the 70s here now. So things like that. That's how Saudi Arabia influences our institutions, which means that you cannot do any criticism of Islam, because you have to remember with Christianity, the Bible, there's been a historical criticism, literary criticism, and textual criticism of the Bible. We are not allowed to do those things with the Quran and Islam in general. There's been no historical critique, no literary critique, and no textual critique in our universities on how Islam started. Recently, there's been a whole bunch of books published. So it's just one form of how Saudi Arabia influences us through our universities. So there are other forms of foreign interference in Canada, and we should be looking at all of them. But I hope that this public inquiry does what it's supposed to do. And then we get to the bottom of this, preferably before the next election. I think it's going to damage the Liberals immensely because they sat on something they shouldn't have. And it makes them look bad. But any Canadians out there, let me know what you guys think of the public inquiry. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Leave comments in the comment section. Hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, subscribe to it. I just do this as a rant, not for any real monetary gain. And until next time, this has been the Great White North Report.
I'm in love with the